Hey everyone, how's it going? So, Merry Christmas. Yes, it's Christmas Day. I'm working on my F-150, the one that was given to me, with a 4.6 and a blown out spark plug. These things are notorious for blowing out spark plugs when they get older, and it takes the threads with them. If the spark plug wasn't torqued down correctly, this is kind of a common issue. Even when they were torqued down correctly, what happens is they get loose over a period of time, and technically you should check them every once in a blue moon, every 30,000 miles. If you're not going to change them, check them. Make sure they're tight, because they can loosen up, and what happens is inside the thread keeps getting beaten up and down, up and down, up and down, because it's just like a little bit of play in between the threads and the spark plug, and after a while it keeps beating on it. That's an aluminum threaded head, takes the threads right out with it. So I figured, because I've already done cylinder 1 for the customer, that a customer gave to me because it happened to cylinder 4, to do cylinder 4 is a bit of a pain because it's under the cowl. So to try to get in there with my borescope to make sure the valves are closed, and to do all of that and make sure the piston's not on top dead center, because if the valve was hanging open or a piston was at top dead center, you can damage it. When you run the rethreader down there, or the tap to create new threads, you can damage a piston, you can damage a valve, you can do a number of things which you don't want to do. So I figured at this point I'm going to do all of them, all the cylinders. So I got 7 to go. I already did one. I'm going to do 7 cylinders, and this way at least I'm fully exposed and I can get in there relatively easy, and I don't have to fight working, underneath the hood, leaning over this thing. I don't have an underhood creeper. If I did, maybe I'd consider it. Nah, I wouldn't. I would still take the body off. In all seriousness, it took me 2 hours. Now, yes, I have a lift, so it makes my life a million times easier. But you know what? You got to utilize what you got, right? If I was doing this in my driveway, obviously I wouldn't be pulling the body off. I wouldn't even bother jacking up the body, because it wouldn't help. What I would probably do on this is I would probably take the front wheels off, let it down as far as it would go to the ground, make my life easier to bend out and go underneath there. But it would be time consuming. I'd rather work easy instead of hard. Yes, it took me 2 hours to take the body off. Yes, it's going to take me 2 hours to put that back together for a grand total of 4 hours. But you know what? I don't have to fight with anything. So it makes my life that much easier. Let me show you what I got. So here it is. Let me back up a little bit. There's the body. There's the engine, tranny, chassis, the whole 9 yards. So, looking back here, it blew out. See, it actually broke the coil too in the process. There's a clamp from when I took one of the hoses off. It fell in there. No big deal. But down inside, all the way down inside, I can pretty much guarantee you the threads are gone. That's what happens. But no big deal. So now I get to do a rethread on all of them. I did the first one already, which was that one. So now I'm just going to do all the rest. Now, one other bonus to having the body off right now is I actually got to do the fuel pump. The fuel pump decided to go poopy on me. So look at that. Here's my fuel pump. How easy is that now? I can also clean out this frame channel here. It's all full of debris. But I'm going to do all of this. Yeah. So let me get going on that. And the funny thing is I'm looking at this motor and I think this is a reman. Go ahead. See that? Something's, either the motor's a reman or who knows, because the truck's got 400,000 miles on it. That's not original. That's painted. So I'm pretty confident somebody did something with this at some point in time. And actually the tranny's a reman too. See that? One thing I did notice is the damper on the dry shaft's coming off. That's no good. I might have to get a yoke for that. Actually, I really don't have a choice. I'm going to have to get a yoke for that. All right, so let me get going. Let me start taking stuff apart here so I can do all of this, and I'll run you step by step through one of these. I've already done it on one video, but I'll do it again. All right, so let me get going. All right, so it's actually the day after Christmas now. So I got the intake off of this thing. I got the coils off, obviously. I cleaned everything up in terms of just blowing the sand and junk out that was there. I didn't clean the gasket surfaces yet. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to put a spark plug socket on the remaining spark plugs and see what happens. I haven't touched anything. I haven't done anything yet. But I just want to show you that I guarantee I'm going to have other spark plugs that are probably loose. So that's the one that blew out right there that I have to fix. there. Look at that. I have not put a socket on this. I have not done anything. I mean, I put a socket on it now, but I didn't do this beforehand. Coming right out. That one's actually tight. Well, that one's loose too. And these threads are boogered on this one. I can feel it. That one's tight. Oh, that one's loose. This one's coming out no problem. I mean, if you look, it only grabs that little bit. It doesn't grab a lot. Either that or this thing wasn't screwed all the way down. No, this thing wasn't all the way down, I don't think. Either that or it's missing threads. So. And that one's tight. So there you go. Spark plugs get beat out of the hole there because they get loose. They get loose and they start vibrating inside the threads, and after a while with the compression and everything else, you know, the high cylinder pressures, it blows the spark plug straight out. So let me get the rest of these plugs out. This way I can turn the motor over easy and I can look down the holes and see what I got to do. I'm going to leave cylinder 1 alone because I already did that one. That was the first one I did. And but we're going to continue with the rest of them. This way it makes life easier turning the motor over too. And here I got my borescope ready. There's the new spark plugs that are going to go in it. I have the kit here somewhere. There's some of the thread inserts that are going to go in. But here's the borescope. I explained it in other videos. You turn it on, and see the light goes on there. And this thing actually connects through the Wi-Fi of your phone, and this way you can look at it on the phone display. So let me do that, and I'm going to start with the first hole, which is number 4 down there. And if you look closely, kind of hard to see because it won't focus correctly. I don't think. Let's see. Can I get it to focus? Nah. Alright, it's too much for this setup I have. But down there, there's no, you can't see any threads. There's a ridge of threads. Yeah, it's not going to light it up. But on the other ones, there is a ridge of threads that you could see. Unfortunately, I can't show you on the video. But what I'm going to do is, actually, you know what? You can see it when, because I'm going to record what I see with the borescope. So let me hook that up through the phone, and then I'll attach that to the video. Now, in that video you just saw, that's the cylinder that the spark plug was out of the hole completely. So there is some water in that cylinder. I'm not too concerned about it because I didn't realize the boot and everything else was completely out of the hole. I never even paid that much attention to it. So it's not coolant or anything like that. That's from basically rainwater dripping down and going through an open hole there. So once I get everything hooked up, I'm going to basically crank this thing over and get all that water out. Or I might go in there with a little sucker thing and suck some of that water out. But my main reason for looking down there, as you can see in that first cylinder, there was almost no threads in the hole at all. On the second one that I looked at, that was the next one up, that was 3, you can actually see threads for the spark plug. So that one appears to still be good, but I'm going to replace them all regardless. At this point, I may as well. So my main reason, like I said, for looking in the hole there, because I wanted to make sure that also a valve wasn't open, because if the valve's hanging open and I run the rethreader down the hole and I catch the valve, end of story, then I got a problem. I got to take the whole thing apart, and I really don't want to do that. So, yeah. So everything is out of the way, so everything looks good. I might rotate the motor over just to verify that everything's okay, just to, peace of mind for myself. But then from there, I'm going to go in and I'm going to run the rethreader in there, or the tap, so I can run the thread insert in there. That's what I should say. Here's a special tool that comes with the kit. Now the initial kit, comes with 3 different ones of these inserts, these thread inserts, and let's just see. As you see, it's threaded like the spark plug on the inside, but you're going to oversize the cylinder head and then insert this threaded insert. Now the reason for the knurls on the top is you have to smack the top of this in with this special tool, and it'll stake out the top side of this so it locks in place on the head. Now, one thing, this is the factory replacement spark plug. And if you look, see how it's actually narrower than the insert itself once it's in place? Now, when you're installing these things, you want to use a stepped or a shouldered spark plug like this, because see how it's not as narrow, or it's wider rather than the thread insert? Because you want this thing to stop on the cylinder head and not go any further down, because with that style, how do you know when you're going all the way down? How do you know when you've reached the bottom of the threads? You can actually go and insert it and go all the way into the combustion chamber. How do I know this? First time I ever did one. That's how I know this. That became a nightmare. But anyway, so yeah, you got to be mindful of that. Because I threaded that thing down. I was like, this thing's going awfully far down. And all of a sudden, the spark plug socket was like bottomed out on the head. And I realized that it was bottoming out on the cylinder head itself. Because if you look, see how it's wider right there? So that was bottoming out on the head over the shoulder. So I was like, uh-oh. So I started to back it out. I got it out and I realized that, hey, this thing actually left the insert all the way down. Oops, sorry about that. It left the insert all the way down, and the spark plug came out. So I was like, uh-oh, what do I do now? So I put some red Loctite on the spark plug and threaded it down by hand. And luckily, it didn't force the threaded part inside the motor. So I let it sit there for about an hour or so. And luckily, it was able to, the Loctite adhered, and I was able to unscrew it and pull the threaded part out. So yeah, I learned that lesson. Thank God I didn't have to pull the head off. It was on a Honda Accord 4-cylinder, 2.4, I think it was. It's many years ago. But yeah, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tool, and they didn't have the tool that I needed for this job in particular, but what I wound up doing was welding this big large bolt to the tool itself. I welded it to it. So now I'm going to put a bunch of wheel bearing grease on this thing to allow it to cut into the head and to also collect any of the shrapnel that comes off, the shredded pieces of aluminum that come off as I thread this down in place. So let's get this packed up with some grease and let's thread this down into the cylinder head. Now the piston itself is down. The valves are not hanging open and in my way, because like I said, if they hang in the way, you're going to damage it when you put this down in there. So this, we're going to insert this in here. They do make this tool that's extra long for situations like this. Actually, I need to get a socket for that. I didn't even think about that. Let me grab a socket for this. This way I can start to thread this down in there and cut the new threads. All right, so I got that in place now. Now, it's kind of hard to see it, but this thing doesn't fit exactly in the hole correctly. And because these threads are already shot, it can actually move around. So you want to try to like eyeball and center it in there. And of course, this thing's not perfectly straight. Now, if the threads were still there, this type of a tap will grab the initial threads and work through them to create the new threads. It'll like drag through. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to put pressure down on this. And just go slowly. And you will all of a sudden feel this thing start to cut. And yes, this thing's going to walk around a bit. It's going to take a little time to get this thing to start doing what it needs to do. But once it starts to cut, let's started cutting now. And you could feel it. You could feel the resistance on it as it's cutting. And you just keep going and feel. You want to feel. Make sure you're not... You'll be able to feel if something is going wrong. And like I can feel it cutting. It's cutting. And once it stops cutting and you feel this thing get free, that means you've cut all the way through the head as far as you need to. And it's still cutting. Let's just keep this going. I think I'm coming to the end here now. It's starting to get a little bit easier, so it must be at the end. Yep. All right, so now it's not cutting anymore. All it's doing is dragging through. So now I'm going to back it out. Obviously, you want to do all of this by hand. You don't want to do this with an impact. Because I'm sure somebody out there is going to say, oh, I could do this thing faster if I just put a gun on it or something. And there we have it. It cut everything out that I needed it to cut out. So let's stop the video right here. Sorry about that. Now what I'm going to do there is I am going to take my blowgun, my long tube blowgun, I'm going to stick it down there and I'm going to try to blow all that stuff out so it pushes everything up and out. Sorry, I got indigestion for some reason. I guess I shouldn't eat, what the heck's it called? Beef jerky. It gives me indigestion, but I love this stuff. Anyway, so I'm going to blow that stuff through and let me get that cleaned out. And now with that thing cleaned out as much as it can be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray brake clean down there. Now yes, brake clean is going to wash the cylinder walls and stuff like that, so you got to be mindful of that. So let me get this filled up and then let me show you what I'm going to do. So now with that like that filled up, what I did was I hooked up a booster pack right here, and I have a starter trigger that I hooked up to where the starter relay should be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank this thing. Alright, you don't really see anything coming out of it, but that's fine. So now what I can do is verify that it's clean. Which, yeah, it appears to be. From what I can see. Looks like there's like a little piece of aluminum stuck in the threads there, but that doesn't really matter. It is aluminum, whereas the insert is steel. So now, like I said, you want to use a shouldered spark plug like this. This way it bottoms out and stops. I'm going to put red Loctite on this thing. I'm going to spray the threads out one more time with some brake clean and just blow some air down there and see what happens. And then we're going to install this. Oops, sorry, it keeps going out of focus. Sorry about that. What I wound up doing was I really loaded it up with brake clean and I blew it out with a blowgun. And it seemed to clear out pretty much everything in there. So now, like I said, I'm going to install this. I'm going to put red Loctite on it first. So there we go. We have Loctite on it. That's actually green Loctite. I didn't have any red. Green is actually stronger than the red, which will work perfectly in this application. Now make sure when you're putting this in that you have those knurls up towards the base of the, the hex part of the spark plug. Make sure you have them up at the end, because if you don't, if you have them down at the bottom, then you got a problem. So put them in that spot, in that position, and now we're going to thread this back in place. I shouldn't say back in place, but in place. And the threads might start off a little strange. And now I can feel actually the knurls touching, because they're a little on the rough side. So now you don't want to bear down on this, but you want to just make sure that you're fully seated, which there, it's, I mean, you can see I'm not putting any effort into it. It's fully seated. So now I'm going to let that sit. I actually got to run to the parts store, because luckily when I took this thing apart, I realized the radiator was broken. It wasn't leaking yet, but the whole upper neck fell right off. Imagine driving down the road and that thing coming apart. I'd blow the hose completely off, and then I'd really have a major problem. So anyway, I got to run over to the parts store. I'm going to grab a radiator, and yeah, go from there. Hopefully by the time I get, well, I know by the time I get back, that Loctite will be set in there, so everything will be good, and I should be able to pull the spark plug out and then run that that setting tool down in place, the one that's going to peen it out. So let me go do that. So it's been a little over an hour now, so now I'm going to pull that plug out, and hopefully the sleeve will stay in place, or the insert rather. I've had it before where the insert actually comes back out with the plug, and it's kind of a pain, but hopefully the Loctite kept it in place. The only problem is it's cold too, so cold makes things a pain in the neck. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so it's down in place. Now I got to stake it with that staking tool, which is this right here. And like I said, that bottom edge there, what that does is it peens it out so the knurls lock into the head. So you take this and you drop it down in place. But what I'm going to have to do is I got to get a socket that this is going to fit into, and then use a little extension, because since it has to go down in the hole, it's a little bit of a pain. So let me find something to use that on. All right, so there we go. And that's going to go in the hole there, and you can kind of feel it go into where it has to on that spark plug, on that sleeve in there, insert, whatever you want to call it. So it should be sitting good like that. So now what you're going to do is you're going to wrap that with a hammer. Let me set up my tripod real quick. Alright, so now give that a good, you can actually feel, I don't know if you heard the first hit, it's kind of a soft sound to it. That's the actual material starting to spread. And then the subsequent hits, you can hear it was a louder, like more dense hit, like it sounded like it was actually making good contact with something. That was it spreading it out. You're not going to be able to see anything by looking in there, but that should be good to go. So now let me just throw the spark plug in it, and then I'm going to do all the others. Yeah, really nothing spectacular about it. So let me get everything else done, and then we'll button up this video. Alright guys, so I actually just started this up. It sounded fine. It ran chuggly for a few seconds, you know, like misfiring all over the place a little bit. But that's to be expected because of the grease that went down in there, the brake clean I stuck down in the holes to clean the threads up, stuff like that. Plus that one cylinder had some water in it, and that's from, you know, it's sitting outside with that plug hole wide open, and it's directly under the cowl. And since it's sticking straight up, you know, water just ran down inside of it. Not a big deal. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start it back up so you can hear it. And I still haven't put coolant in it. Maybe I should do that right now. I'll put coolant in it. And then I'm going to let it get hot, and then I got to change the oil and go from there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it sounds great. So let me put some coolant in this thing real quick, and then let's start it up. So I just got 2 gallons, 1 gallon coolant, 1 gallon of water in it. Inside there. I know the bottle looks nasty, but the system's pretty clean actually. Anyway, so let's start it up. Like I said, I did have it running just to get rid of the chuggle that was going to be in it. It sounds good. I'm happy with it. It's smooth too. All right. Well, I'm gonna let it get warmed up and go from there. Once it's warmed up, I'm gonna change the oil. But I mean, it sounds fantastic. The motor sounds great. I know the truck says it's got 400,000 miles on it, but that motor was replaced at some point. The transmission was replaced at some point too. So who knows how many miles are actually on it. Judging by the grease on that motor, See, it's probably got 100,000 miles on it. But anyway, all right. So hopefully you got something out of that. If you did, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe too. All right, guys. Have a great day. Keep wrenching.